This jacket is reversible. Although it was created using Quick Sew pattern number 3292, the pattern does not include directions for making it reversible. Also, almost every pattern company has some sort of dolman sleeved jacket or robe pattern that you could use.
This is a dolman sleeve jacket. The front includes a shawl collar and the sleeve, which takes quite a width, and the back also includes the sleeve. To fit the pattern on the fabric, I have folded crosswise instead of the normal lengthwise. Place the pattern on the straight grain by measuring from the selvage edge to the line at several spots along the pattern grain line. This jacket front has an odd looking extension up here. It is actually the shawl collar extending to the center back. It will have a seam across here and a pivot point here. Having measured the grain lines from the selvage edge, this jacket is ready to be cut out. Although this pattern needed to have the full width of the fabric, this fabric is 60 wide and there is some left over on this edge. Having cut out the main body parts, the fabric has been folded crosswise this time, and the belt has been laid out and cut in two sections. There will be a seam down the center back. This is the amount of fabric I have left having cut out the jacket. There are two pieces just alike. What's wonderful about the non-woven polar fleece is this will easily be used for other projects. The very first thing I need to do when I remove the pattern is to take this to the sewing machine and stitch both sides down this line, pivot at this dot, and continue on to about here. After this point is reinforced with this stitching, the back has the matching dot. I've sewn the pivot line here and the center back collar together at 1/4 inch seam. Next, sew the 1/4 inch seam down the center back. This is the left front, sewing at the center back of the collar to the right front. The pivots have been stitched, stay stitched here. This is the top of one sleeve. This is the top of the other sleeve. This is the back where the center back seam has been sewn. The pins are at the pivot point. This is one side of a sleeve, and this is the other side of a sleeve. In order to stitch this collar to the back, you must clip carefully to the pivot point, but not go through the reinforcement stitching. Begin directly at the pivot point and stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance the entire length of the sleeve top shoulder. Stitch the other shoulder seam to the pivot point. Pin together the center back of the collar and the center back of the back. Then stretch open that clip that you made to the pivot point and pin the rest of the neck. Stitch between pivot points connecting the collar with the back neck. From the outside, the pivot point should look like this, and the center back seams should be lined up. With the top of your shoulder seam sewn, the center back and the center collar sewn, and the neckline attached, your piece now looks like this. Pick up your garment and fold at the top of your shoulder seams to put your underarm seam together and pin. This is the collar. The underarm seams are now pinned and ready to be sewn. Lay out your second color exactly the same way as the first, being sure to carefully measure that grain line. Grain line is pulled by gravity and it affects the way the garment hangs on your body. Second verse, same as the first. Stay stitch the pivot line, stitch the center back of your collar, stitch the center back of the back piece. When that is done, stitch the top of the shoulder and sleeve together, and finally pivot and stitch the back of the collar to the neckline. Color number 2 is now stitched. The collar is attached to the back neck. The top shoulder seam's done. The underarm seam's done. I used an overlock machine this time, or the serger instead of the standard machine. You could use either, but the most important difference is down here under the arm on one side. I left a space not sewn big enough for my hand. The next thing is to attach your two jackets together along the front edge and collar. The most important thing along here is to match the seam of the collar, and so I have stitched essentially 1 inch to double check that these two seams line up like I want. In fact, I even took this out 3 times before I'm happy with it, and have now pinned the rest of the front. When you sew, there's a natural tendency for the fabric to stretch. To compensate for this, sew directionally. That means begin at the center and sew all the way down one side. Then start sewing again in the center, overlapping the stitches a bit, and sew all the way down the other side. This should keep your stretching symmetrical. With the entire collar and front edge stitched, it's now time to flip everything right side out and stuff the sleeves inside each other. Be sure nothing of that sleeve is twisted. You want to arrive at the hem, the cuff area, and make sure that your seams for your underarm seam and your top shoulder seams are exactly matching. Fold in a seam allowance and pin just at this fold line so that you can reach it from both sides. You can now see the pin that is attaching the two pieces together, but it's rather from the inside, and I just have one pin. Now I'm going to carefully turn this sleeve inside out again. And here's that same pin from the other direction. Now I've matched up the edges, pinning it, and I'll be able to stitch this sleeve. The entire body of both the black and the white are off to the left of the sewing machine, and the pinned cuff area has been put under the presser foot. This is the way you will be sewing it, taking the pins out as you reach them. Turn that sleeve back right side out. And on the other sleeve, again, pin the fold line of where the hem's going to be to the inside with the pin so that you can turn this wrong side out. As you flip it out, it comes out looking like this. Keep the right sides together and pin the circumference of the hem of your sleeve. Most of the garment is off to the left. Sleeves are in two kind of separate places except for where they're pinned together at the edge, and it's time to stitch. The jacket is now flipped to a right side and everything's smoothed out, and we're ready to do the hem. Leave as much of the garment right side out as possible, but at the hemline, turn it inside out and start pinning. Match at the underarm seam and the center back seam, and go as far as you possibly can, hopefully to the next underarm seam and maybe even a little further. Stitch along the lower edge as far as you can, and at the corner stitch diagonally and then clip it off. Turn your jacket right side out again. You have most of it stitched, and remember that hole we left in the side seam? Now is the time to go in and finish the hem by pulling it through this hole. There is not a lot left to be stitched, and thus you don't have to pull much of your jacket through that underarm opening. Stitch diagonally across the point and then cut off this excess fabric in the point so you'll get a crisp outside appearance. The lower edge is now all stitched. Make sure that you like how your point is turned, and then you will need to hand sew shut this little bit of an opening. The opening to turn your jacket right side out was strategically placed in the underarm seam. It also was in the darker fabric, which hides stitches better than light, but do take care to use the slip stitch and small stitches to close this opening. Roll the edge of the jacket between your index finger and your thumb to get the seam as much as possible on the very edge of your jacket, and pin. With a slightly longer stitch length and your edge stitch foot, stitch along the edge of your jacket. The belt has one side made out of fabric A, one side made out of fabric B. Stitch down both sides. The corners are reinforced stitch so that the bolt can be trimmed away. The fast turn tubes are a great quick way to turn the belt right side out. Normally this polyester fabric requires no ironing, but during construction it's nice to press nice crisp edges. Use a piece of wet cotton between the iron and the fabric to protect both. At the center back of the belt, connect the tube by tucking one end into the open tube of the other half.
Here are some additional dolman sleeve patterns that could be constructed in a similar fashion as the one just demonstrated. I hope you will try one yourself.